Hello, hi, oh wow, okay, hi. Good afternoon, hi everybody, thank you for coming. My name is Alicia Krupp and I'm a member of the Unitarian Church and a member of the Dismantling White Supremacy Working Group. This is the committee behind me. Having heard her powerful and under-attended presentation at the City of Bloomington's Seat at the Table gathering, our Dismantling White Supremacy Working Group invited Jada Bee, local singer, poet, business owner, and activist, to share her perspective on confronting white supremacy, what it is, how it functions, and how can we identify and do something about it when we see it in our community, our lives, and in ourselves. The experiences she will share here are either personal or researched and verified experiences from the Black cultural community. The action plan for anti-racist work is grounded in the Black Lives Matter ethos, along with other progressive ideologies working to fight white supremacy and fascism.
And thanks to this group and thanks for the invitation. I'm Reverend Mary Ann Macklin, and I'm the senior minister here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Bloomington, and welcome to Jada Bee. And I have just a short bio, a little bit more than was just offered. As one of the core council members of Black Lives Matter, Jada Bee has helped create and execute BLM programs like our Necessity Drive for local social service organizations and BLM Seat at the Table roundtable discussions, which in 2019 featured part of this presentation on confronting white supremacy. She is also on the board for Democracy for Monroe County, serving as its endorsement committee chair last year. In her work with BLM in 2020, she hopes to do more giving back to the community, registering more Black folks to vote, expanding BLM's Make the Right Call campaign, and starting bi-monthly Black Talks, where the community and BLM members can talk about issues relating to race in the Bloomington community. And I do know that somewhat recently you were on the podcast, My Racist Friend, and yeah. There was another podcast here last night with Dr. Maureen Walker that was also live streamed and is ours, and you'll hear that podcast out there as well, and it's a wonderful gift to our community. I want to invite everyone to arrive, to really allow yourself to arrive to this space, and just take in a deep breath. For some folks, you're going to hear things that are not going to be a surprise. For others, there may be things you hear that are hard to hear, that make you want to jump back. Some people, as we were listening today to our sermon, to maybe when we're confronted with very uncomfortable things, to run. And we are invited to stay. We are invited to be here. And one of the lessons I learned, my spiritual mentor, Angeles Arian, is that in the West, so much we tend to listen with our heart, and then we try to figure it out with our head. And then our heart hurts, and then we just start getting into judgmental, well, this was this and this, and we get into this. And it is suggested, she was indigenous herself and studied with indigenous people, that you receive with your head, and then you let your heart discern. And it's a very different way of receiving information. It doesn't make you go like this as fast. And it allows you to take that in and then have time later where you can really allow your heart to hear some of this in a way that you might not to be able to right away. I hope that makes sense. And I just want to offer this poem of How to Tell the Truth by Paul Williams. When you just have to talk, sometimes try being silent. And when you feel reluctant to say anything, make the effort to put what you're feeling into words. Look and see if you're willing to trust yourselves to misunderstand each other, and then we go from there. And you listen as if. Listen as if you can't always tell what the truth is. Listen as if you might be wrong, especially when you know you're right. And I am talking to a lot of white folks right now. Listen as if you were willing to take the risk of growing beyond your righteousness. Listen as if love mattered. Listen if love mattered all of us. Listen as if love matters, because it does. Thank you for being here. Jada Bee.
Thank you all for being here, and thanks to the UU Church and the organization that brought me in today. I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you in particular to my sister Renee for doing the hard work to get things happening. Yeah. Thank you. I want to start today with a land acknowledgement. Acknowledging and honoring the indigenous communities native to this region, recognizing that this church, this town, and all of our lives here are built upon indigenous homelands and resources. I would like to honor and recognize the Miami, the Delaware, the Shawnee people, and in particular my elders and ancestors, the Potawatomi people, as past, present, and future caretakers of this land. I ask that we all take a moment to acknowledge not only the indigenous peoples native to this region, but the continued marginalization and occupation of indigenous communities all over the world. I ask that we pause to acknowledge the sacredness of the land itself, who is a living entity that teaches us and cares for us. Please take a minute. So, thank you. We're getting started, and I want to talk about what it is to create a black space. Today, we are centering black women in our discussion, and it is crucial to unlearning oppressive behaviors. Why are we centering black women in the conversation? Number one, I'm a black woman, a black queer woman, and I am talking to you today. So we are centering my perspective of the world and my experiences in the world. We're also doing that because often, black women's voices and black queer voices are overlooked and taken for granted. So, if during the course of this discussion you feel like you have a question or you're concerned, write it down. We'll talk about it later. I'm going to be here for questions and answers afterwards. I'll stay as late as I need to talk to people. I'm giving you that time. Why am I asking you to center us? Because this uncomfortable conversation is because who bears the burden of this conversation? It isn't white folks who are uncomfortable. It is the black folks who have to live it every day. We bear the burden. And so I'm going to get into more about what that is as we keep going. The starting point of this conversation is a little bit, the memes. I should talk about my white hot memes. Because they are white hot. I find that memes do a very specific function, which is that they contextualize and synthesize, everything that I'm going to be saying in this speech today. The memes are going to give it to you shorthand. And also for some of us who process things differently, maybe reading and seeing things through pictures is a better way to keep it in your head than just hearing me blah, blah, blah. And then hopefully they reinforce each other. And I love a good meme, can't help it. I want to write a whole talk about them. So definitions and a lexicon to work from. First and foremost, race is a construct. It's a way of identifying people and categorizing them. And the simplest way to do that is you look different from me. And it's also convenient that if you want to enslave someone, you just pick the people who look different from you and you go after them. Much like gender, race is a construct. It is created by society. There is no such thing as white and black There are humans, but what is real is our ethnic, tribal, religious, and cultural differences. And those things are real and exist, and they happen to have fallen underneath this color difference. There is no biological difference between us. Racism, however, is the belief that there are not only biological differences, but cultural differences. Those cultural differences imply an inferiority. It is really a system, a set of systems of power. Power taken and maintained sometimes by force. Often it relies on complacency and apathy among people to continue. White supremacy enters that power vacuum created by racism and says, white people the apex. It teaches segregation and purity. It aims for the death, murder, imprisonment, detention, expulsion, enslavement, and most of all, oppression of anyone that doesn't fit the white supremacist ideals of whiteness. Because to be Jewish does not, and white-skinned, does not necessarily fit under the definition of a white supremacist whiteness. I know of several white supremacy leaders who beat up other white people because they won't adhere to their definition of whiteness. It's also systematic, much like racism. It can water itself down and be integrated into the mundane elements of everyday life as obstacles for black and brown people. Exploitative capitalism is a prime example of its systematic implications. The black wealth gap created from slavery. So the wealth of this country built on the backs of black people, white people advance, have more money than black folks, and then we're taught the bootstrap narrative that says if you just pull yourself up by your boots, you too can achieve, even though you're starting at a different wealth level. It also functions passively in conjunction with racist complacency and apathy, and we'll talk about that later in our white liberalism talk. White nationalism and fascism. White nationalism overlaps and it can be interchangeable with white supremacy and white separatism, and it says the U.S. is historically a white-dominated country, and it should remain so. U.S. patriotism can often look like white nationalism. It wears the same clothes and iconography. Fascism as a far-right authoritarian ultranationalism characterized by dictatorship and forcible suppression to opposition and strong regulation of society and economy. White nationalism is often inspired by fascism. They may not be hand in hand, but they sure do have a crush on each other. So, yes, Virginia, everybody is racist. We can't escape it. It is in the air we breathe. It is who we are. It is written into the fabric of this country. You know, my presence here is a bill of sale. And your presence here, white folks, is the owner. And all we've been doing since that time has been cutting up that bill of sale and removing your ownership. So we all have ingested it on varying levels, and we are struggling to work free. Who decides who is racist? So the meme there is talking about, like, white people don't determine what's racist, just like men don't determine what is sexist, just like cis people don't determine what's transphobic, straight people don't determine what's homophobic, lesbian and gay people don't determine what's biphobic. The oppressor does not get to tell the oppressed who is oppressed and who isn't. That is not how this works. So when a black person says to you, that's a racist comment, or you are racist, they're doing it because there is something happening in your behavior and language that triggers that. And they know it viscerally. They don't have to go to college to get a degree to do it, to understand it. They know it viscerally. What is white supremacy? And how does it function? When we think of white supremacy, we think of Nazis and the Klan, and yes, the Klan and the far right are on the rise in various forms, and they take up a lot of space, they make a lot of noise, and they grab attention, they get headlines, they hold rallies, and hurt people in the clear eye of the public. They are a violent outbreak of the sickness of racism, and they must be stopped. However, they are not the daily threat to black people and brown people's lives. They are just an aspect of the larger issue. Beyond the white robes, the white polos, the khakis, the tiki torches, beyond the Nazi salutes and the glorification of failed leaders and the glory of old Dixieland, there is a murky system of oppression that functions as everyday life, but are really minefields of white supremacy that marginalized people are forced to navigate in order to survive. It is a daily struggle. There is never a moment where that struggle is suspended or lifted, except perhaps in our own insular communities. But even those have their own oppressive reason for existing. These minefields range from corrupt police, law enforcement, and criminal justice systems, to political gerrymandering, to voter suppression, to racially biased school tests, to racially biased school discipline, to it's being unarmed, sitting in your own home, playing video games with your nephew, and losing your life, while another angry white man goes on a killing spree and is taken into custody alive and well. It is growing up, like myself, in a rural community your whole life with multi-generational roots here, and having transplants to your community ask you where you're from all the time. It is microaggressions and macroaggressions that black women live through in regards to their hair, clothing, and jewelry. And it is black men who can't be seen as anything more than a thug or a criminal. It is being a scholar, a longtime activist and political artist in your community, and having your credentials questioned when you are asked to give a talk about your own experience as a queer black woman on a topic that you face daily. In Bloomington, for black and brown people who live here in a mostly white and socially liberal town like Bloomington, Indiana, white supremacy is the constant insistence on civility by white liberals. And especially from black people, when we talk about things that affect us. Oh, wait. So, missed one slide, but that's okay. So some of you, if you heard the podcast that I did with Amy McCase, you might have heard me talk about Voldemort versus Dolores Umbridge, right? So long after Voldemort's defeat, Dolores Umbridge is still among us. The Dolores Umbridges are still in seats of power. Much like her real world counterparts, Umbridge does not consider herself anti-Muggle or, in real world, anti-black or marginalized people. She just thought she was looking out for the best interests of the wizards. Now, some of you who don't know Harry Potter, this is making no sense to you, but those of you who get it. Yeah, seeing some get it. That's fine. She did this through bureaucracy. So here's how it relates. For those of you who don't know Harry Potter, she did this through bureaucracy, with the easy approval of the powers that be, who allowed her to do whatever she wanted, to go unchecked, okay? Why? Because one, it's legal. It was legal. It's centered on law and order and rulemaking and rule following. And it benefited them in Harry Potter, namely Fudge, right? But in the real world, they want to show anyone who wants to show that they're tough on crime, they believe in law and order, and it can often be about legacy maintenance or boosting their profile for higher offices or continued election wins. Voldemort could only be defeated through a few means, namely Harry, with the help of some other folks. But much like the Klan, it takes a certain level of resistance perhaps physically repelling them. But Dolores is tricky because we use platitudes like they're only doing their jobs, they're trying their best, we all don't like it, but it's the law and the way things are. Sorry, there's a typo. Or they're a really nice person, so you should be nice to them. As if niceness had anything to do with the intent or the impact of their behavior. It's the issue of intent versus impact. If people are good, they are incapable of bad intentions. Mass incarceration law's intent was to lower crime and to stop high rates of drug use and trafficking, but the impact was generations of black men and women incarcerated at much higher rates than their white counterparts for similar crimes. When the city of Bloomington published the addresses of opioid deaths by overdose, the intent was to determine where to devote local resources for the opioid crisis, but the impact was to share personal addresses of grieving families. That caused shame and harm, and it created a potential for negative economic and social impact on those areas. So it doesn't really matter if the people who are doing not great things are good people or bad people. It is not about that. So white liberalism, this is where white liberalism factors into this, right? It can be defined as its lack of anti-racist ideology. Someone who perhaps is socially liberal on many matters, but fails to incorporate intersectionality into their beliefs and ideals. White liberalism lacks an awareness of its own whiteness and its own white supremacy. White liberalism engages in as much individualism as conservative Republicans. It relies upon that bootstrap narrative that we were talking about to explain failures and success stories within the black community, and it implies individualism in every case of white supremacy, believing if only we could change that one person, that one Nazi's behavior, then we can change the whole system just from that one person. It engages in the love it or leave it ideology. It won't admit that they could ever behave, white liberals won't admit that they could ever behave in a way that could be seen as racist, so they are offended that you said so. They use the rhetoric that mirror images of white supremacist language. So if you don't want to support Schooner Creek Farms, don't go there. If you don't like this country, you can just leave it. These are mirror images. It never addresses the problem of Schooner Creek Farms or the problems with America. Okay. And, Donald Trump, of course, engages in this a lot. The Squad is a perfect example of this. When they were in the news every day critiquing him, he was literally telling American Congress members that they can leave this country if they don't like it. When literally the thing that they have devoted their lives to is fixing this country and fixing the problems within it as they see it. That they've literally devoted everything they have to helping America be better. The same can be said when you're talking about black activists. And Paul Robeson makes a good point here, which is that, my family, my ancestors built this country, and I'm gonna stay right here. And I'm gonna partake in it, and I'm gonna make it better, and no one is gonna move me from that. And yes, there are some black folks that would rather not be here. And it is because they feel constant torture on a daily basis. And so, yes, of course you want to give up. But, people often criticize me and say, I don't like this town. I'm from here. I love this town. All of my memories are here. I am trying to make it better so that I can wake up in the morning and feel good about being here. So this gets into the white fragility thing just a little bit. It's a major obstacle to this conversation. The intersection of white supremacy and white liberalism is white fragility. It is the offense taken at being called out on racist behaviors and ideas. And I get really upset about this language of calling out versus calling in. The idea of calling white people in as opposed to calling them out often means that we are holding white people's hands and centering their voices in a conversation and coddling them through their growth experience when we should be centering those who are oppressed. Calling in often is a hyper focus on those doing the harm as opposed to those who are being harmed. So I prefer calling out. And this PC conversation that we're having is being primarily led by white people. And a calling out also involves providing a solution for you. Of here's how you deal with things. White guilt has to do with this a lot. White fragility is rooted in white guilt, the unconscious knowledge that white people profited from their ancestors' slavery and segregation, but that they personally didn't do it. It creates a psychological disconnect. That like just because you are not marching through the streets wearing a Klan's hood, or you personally, especially if you are poor, you do not see why there's this conversation about, the benefits of being white in this country. Because you're like, I don't have any benefits. I don't have a new car. I don't have anything, But the reason why you don't have anything isn't because you're white. It has nothing to do with your color. Whereas oftentimes the reason why African Americans and black folks and people of color don't have anything is because of their color. So how do we solve white fragility? Y'all got a sheet. Some of you, many of you, got a sheet. So that's just Robin DiAngelo's sort of like thinking through this process. Now I'm going to tell you, she is white herself, and her book, White Fragility, and this article that handout is based on, has its own whiteness issues. Again, she's can be sometimes pro calling in as opposed to calling out, and she can talk about things in this like, well, we need to hold everybody's hand, and so there's some problems there. So don't read it in a vacuum. Read the supplemental material around it. To be honest, we have to the safety and humanity of black people and people of color must be prioritized in anti-racist work. And we can't do that with white folks crying wolf. To be honest, my gut reaction when I am around white fragility is suck it up, buttercup.
Oh, baby.
Suck it up. Suck it up. Do better. Put your hurt feelings aside. Put the fact that you feel personally offended aside, because you know what? We feel that way times 10 every day. If my wife were to tell you the prep work that I had to do to be here today emotionally, you would be shocked. So, suck it up. We need a society of accountability and of reparations, and a society that values accountability to black folks and people of color who are harmed. So instead of being offended, start asking the whys and hows of your white supremacy and racism. So Martin Luther King Day is coming up. That's right. I know, a little shout out to Martin Luther King. He is often the palatable black person. And he has been extremely whitewashed. This is my favorite quote from him. This is while he was in jail. He was writing to other clergy members, and he says, "The Negro's greatest stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner," which I think is just makes them just seem really buffoonishry, but the white moderate, and he's using white moderate, but he's saying white liberal. who is devoted to order, more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. So it is that negative peace. Negative peace is the absence of justice. It functions like a black hole, sucking up all around it until it collapses. And for lasting change, much like true forgiveness and restorative justice to take place, the cause of the harm has to be localized, has to be named and faced, and justice has to be served. And when that harm is slavery and segregation and white supremacy itself, the harm has to be dealt with holistically, knowing that it isn't a short-term fix or something that can be achieved in a shorter amount of time than it took to oppress people. Nor will justice always look civil. Those demanding justice aren't doing it because everything is fine and they just want to cause trouble. They are demanding justice because there are flaws in our society and they cause harm. So, some of you here may be thinking that I am not behaving in a civil way today. And I tell you truthfully, I am. Civility, I'm sorry. Thank you. I know. Y'all. Okay. Civility above all else. White liberalism often says, look, we know there are problems, but there is a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. And if you are not civil, you are choosing the wrong way. And I want to talk about the real problem of that, which is who gets to set what is civil? Who says what is civil? Colin Kaepernick's anthem protest is the literal definition of civility. It does not get more civil, and y'all know about this for those who don't. He was kneeling during the anthem at national football games in order to protest and have solidarity with Black Lives Matter. Kneeling in our culture, and those of you who are members of the faith community know that that is a sign of deep respect. That many religions, many cultures show kneeling to be deep respect. And in this country, we kneel before things that we are honoring. So the fact that he had so much crazy reaction to a simple act of not doing what the expected thing is about Colin's blackness, the cause he was trying to highlight, and white fragility. That only lasted the most 3 or 4 minutes at every game that he played in, and he didn't even get to play in every game. So if that wasn't respectful, and neither were the Ferguson unrests, what is it that we can do to be civil? How can we be civil? We march, y'all mad. We sit down, y'all mad. We speak up, y'all mad. We die, y'all silent. What is it that we can do? So the community members who were marching during the Ferguson unrest were protesting the shooting of Michael Brown, the refusal to indict Darren Wilson, who shot unarmed Brown. These protests were at first peaceful, simply taking up space in their own community to show their outrage and hurt. They only turned violent when police rolled up in military assault vehicles to do crowd control. They rolled over makeshift memorials for Mr. Brown, shooting tear gas and rubber bullets into peaceful, non-violent protesters, forcing them into confined areas. So you tell me who's being civil. Civility is subjective. If you systematically oppress people through violence, imprisonment, welfare, economic warfare, And their response to that is to occasionally march peacefully in the streets, chanting about injustices. Who is being civil? In Bloomington, if you spend $250,000 on a military assault vehicle, similar to the ones used in the Ferguson protests, when our town is in the middle of housing shortages, opioid epidemic, high poverty rates, school shortages, school funding shortages, climate change initiatives that we want to do, and the realistic fear that the military assault vehicle will be used to hurt and curtail protests from marginalized people. If you do that, and the only response is that Black Lives Matter disrupts a city council meeting peacefully, we ask the mayor to reconsider the purchase, and the city council to reconsider the purchase, to do a public and open review of the vehicle, providing well-searched and well-informed opinions. But we're met by a refusal from the government to compromise, a refusal to go through the proper city council channels for funding, and a public refusal to admit that marginalized people's fears and concerns were legitimate. The question remains, who is being civil and who isn't? Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding of people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. I know how to deal with a Nazi. I do not know how to deal with city council members who won't even talk to us on issues relating to Black culture and the Black community. I don't know how to deal with a mayor who refuses to compromise, refuses to do things in a fair play way when it has to do with marginalized communities. I don't know what to do with that. It is hard to fathom how to deal with that. So the only way to do it is through direct action. And the quote that Dr. King quote, that shallow misunderstanding or shallow understanding, it could be a perfect definition for white liberalism. Sadly, we deal with anti-Black behavior in this community on a daily basis. And the problem with all of that is that you don't have to just be white to engage in anti-Black behavior. Other people of color are not exempt from that behavior. There's a place where communication can break down to that shallow understanding of racism and white supremacy, and in particular of anti-Black thinking and behavior. And so it is why I center Black thought and Black thinking in conversations. We've seen this breakdown and this form of white supremacy happen in this community. The farmers market is a good example of it. This shallow understanding of how white supremacy works is why we still have white supremacists in our farmers market. It is the negative piece. It is the definition of the negative piece. It wants the glory days, the good old days back at all costs. It maintains that if you talk about the real problem that exists in this country, and in particular in this town, you are not only creating the problem, but you are the problem. And we've seen that turn in conversation happen against the protesters. The negative piece function as a full stop to protest because it tells you that law and order are the most important things. The so-called proper way is more important, and it rewrites history to say that all meaningful societal gains happen peacefully and within the bounds of law, forgetting the fact that Martin Luther King was once the most hated man in this country. And that literally anything that a local Black Lives Matter chapter is doing are playbooks that he wrote, and other Black activists from the 60s wrote. We're not inventing the wheel. And in fact, in prepping for this conversation, I watched a lot of talks online given from famous black leaders in the 60s to some in the 90s to some currently. And the thing that was insane and hard to take was they were talking about the exact same things, as if no progress has been made. And they were talking about it in the exact same way, as if no progress had been made. And I'm talking from some of the most radical people to the most palatable people, to those that are on every talk show every day. And it's insane. The consequences of civility and the negative peace felt most by marginalized people, and in particular black people, who have to be the model of patience and civility no matter what happens to them. Civility is a cudgel used by white folks to further oppress marginalized people. And when marginalized people are black folks, that emphasis on civility carries coded language that says, while you are being murdered, imprisoned, marginalized in every aspect of your life, you must always think of your oppressor's views of us. We have to be palatable. We have to beg for our lives with respect and thankfulness in our tone and manner. This is peak white fragility. That when someone is literally begging you not to shoot them, and you're a police officer, you have all the power. They have to say please and thank you. If any of you have ever seen the video of Philando Castile being murdered, and I suggest if you are white, you should watch it. If you are black, y'all don't need to see that, because you already know. After he is, she's filming from inside the car, there's one from his dash cam, and there's one from inside the car. Philando Castile is dying on camera. He is literally dying on camera. And his partner is the epitome of calm. She is so collected. I am not as collected as she is. I don't know how she's doing it other than the fact that she is scared to death that he's going to shoot her too. And I believe her child was in the car. But she is, yes, sir, no, sir, please, sir, you've killed him, sir. And it is terrifying to watch. The ultimate consequences of being uncivil often include the police. To be pro-cop often means you are pro-white supremacy. The police are the enforcers of civility for white supremacy. White liberals' adherence to police culture by way of rigid law and order philosophy and methodology proves its deep connection to white supremacy. The police are key elements in maintaining white supremacy. White liberalism feeds the power of the police by over-reliance upon them to solve any problems of civility. This over-reliance on the police to solve civility problems takes a sinister quality when used against black people and people of color. Black folks in your neighborhood and they shouldn't be there? Call the police. Black people barbecuing and you don't think they should be there? Call the police. A black woman irate at a store clerk who's being rude to her? Call the police. And so on and so on. Black children selling lemonade? Call the police. Your individual positive experiences with police do not outweigh the fact that institutionalized racism is the backbone of our criminal justice system. You might know one good cop. And in fact, I do. I have a distant cousin who is on the BPD force. He is a good guy. He is still a cop. We are still at odds ideologically. If he comes to the cookout, I'll say hey. But it's the white cookout, it's got potatoes on. It's got 7-layer salad. I hate that stuff. Being pro-police involves the denial of reality because historically, the creation of the police leads us back to slave patrols during slavery. Policing has always been about the regulation of black bodies. Let me say that again. Policing has always been about the regulation of black bodies. But the militarization of the police force has turned modern policing fully away from protect and serve, if it ever was, towards control and arrest. Literally giving the police tools to make war on civilian populations, as seen in the Ferguson unrest. I had family that was there. They sent us pictures. It looked like war zone. Reports after reports show racial biases among police officers. They show problematic profiling, arrest records, excessive use of force, of sexual violence. Women and Policing.com states that 2 studies have found at least 40% of police officers' families experience domestic violence, and that domestic violence is 2 to 4 times more common among police families than American families in general. And that's just those that get reported. So you know it's higher. So if that's the case, then more than half of the police forces in this country are violent in their own homes. That speaks to a trend of abusive behaviors within the police. News stories come out daily about departments having black and brown arrest quotas, of turning off body cams to physically assault black and brown suspects, that police chiefs create games of violence against marginalized people to play when they're on duty. Or that in 34 states, police officers are allowed to have sex with suspects while in custody, in places like jail cells or in the back of police cars, and that harms sex workers at extreme rates. The police as a whole is a deeply flawed and racist institution and is often characterized as a few bad apples. But I say to you, this insistence of a few bad apples does not account for how the entire bunch was acquired, or the fact that those bad apples actually infect not just the bunch they come from, but the whole orchard. And it spreads to all orchards. And in addition, the reality is you only have a relatively few okay apples among orchard after orchard of rotten, infected fruit. Our own BPD is no exception to the rules. They arrest black folks at much higher rates than white population for the same or similar amount of crimes. I am not a statistician. I'm not gonna throw a bunch of stats up here for you. But luckily, your own UU Racial Justice Task Force has already done the work for you. They did a 20-year longitudinal study that says from the 90s to today, BPD continues to arrest the black population, which is only 3.6, higher than the white population. And the stat I always think about is the marijuana arrest when we live in a college town where you know every college student on campus is high right now. It's Saturday. They are literally high right now. But the white kids are not getting arrested at the same rate as the black kids because they are being profiled. So I'm going to shift you to the longitudinal study that they did on race and criminal justice that yours did. And additionally, I'm going to ask you to check out BLM's resource list on why police do not make us more safe. It's several articles. It also has some tactics to do instead of calling the police. Confronting White Supremacy. And I have no idea what time it is, but we've got a little bit more to go. Thank you. What does confronting white supremacy look like? Is it just punching a bunch of Nazis? That seems very time-consuming. And Dr. King told us no, the KKK is not the biggest threat to our liberation. Dr. King already told us this. We've got the proof that going after one Nazi one at a time is not going to solve everything. And I said before that the Klan and organizations like AIM, which is the organization that Schooner Creek Farms belongs to, and the white national groups are a violent outbreak of the societal symptoms. They need to be dealt with. And a lot of times the way to deal with that is to challenge them. They bring that threat of violence. So that threat of violence is a tricky one to navigate. Sometimes when they are challenged, they fold, meaning if we counter-protest or we say we're going to counter-protest and they see the numbers go up on Facebook or wherever, they go, ugh, we're not going to do that. They'll say they're going to have a march somewhere, but sometimes they just don't do it because they don't want to deal with it. They like low-hanging fruit. They want to roll into somewhere where they don't have any opposition. They want to roll into somewhere where people have made a way for them. So when you counter-protest, when you organize, a lot of times they fold. They'll move on to those easier targets. But an easier way of doing this than taking to the streets and marching and potentially fighting them is no platforming. Keep them from exposing their hate sheets to your community, hate speech to their community. Keep them from meeting places in town, from businesses, from schools, from libraries, from churches. And I know that this brings up the free speech issue. And it's been the thing that's missing from this conversation about confronting white supremacy. So I'm also going to show you this pyramid before we move on to the next one. It is the key to confronting white supremacy is identification and how it functions. And you'll see genocide is at the top, clearly. But when we move down, we get into denial of white privilege, the white savior complex, white allies speaking over people of color, not all white people. It's just a joke. My one black friend said, and not doing things like not challenging racist jokes and avoiding confrontation with the racist family member. Remaining apolitical, because as white people, you have that option. I don't want to talk about politics. Hate speech is not free speech. Hate speech, especially when it is white supremacy hate speech, is violent speech. It often very clearly states that the white supremacist goals of murder, death, mass incarceration, exploitation, imprisonment, detainment, deportment, and expulsion from the country, that's a plan. The very ideology is based on the threat of violence, and in order to achieve their goals, the forms of violence I mentioned above, they must happen. Hate speech is 100% an incitement to violence. And I know that the Supreme Court, with the help of the ACLU, has enshrined hate speech as free and protected speech. And that is why most white liberals and Republican conservatives always agree upon it. Yes, of course, hey, sorry, but it's free speech. It's a free speech issue. It is a threat of violence. It's 100% a threat of violence, either directly or in an organizational way. One myth about free speech is that it's under attack. And that has been like a 40 years plus in the making conversation. That free speech is constantly under attack in this country. Nasreen Malik wrote in The Myth of Free Speech Crisis, the overblown fears of censorship have been normalized hate speech and silenced majority. She posits that instead of an attack on free speech, there is just more speech than ever before in history. We have new speech coming from our use of the internet and social media. So we're at this point in time in the past 15, 20 years where we're getting an influx of ways of speaking. And that influx of speech, that new speech, tends to be more extreme and more objectionable speech. And therefore, we have more objection to it. She says, this is what free speech crisis myth believers are picking up, a pushback against the increase in intolerance and bigotry, but they are misreading it as a change in free speech attitudes. This increase in objectionable speech with a sense of entitlement, a demand that it must be heard and not challenged, and the freedom of speech fig leaf becomes a convenient tool. Not only do free speech warriors demand that all opinions be heard on all platforms they choose, from college campuses to Twitter, but they also demand that no one object or react to them. She reminds us that free speech is a governmental protection, meaning that the government cannot censor or take anyone's free speech, but that as private individuals, as groups and communities, we can choose what speech we wish to tolerate. She also urges us to fight against the idea that hate speech is protected speech. The manipulation of free speech and the argument about what is legal versus what is moral and ethical is a conversation we need to have in the fight against white supremacy. Yes, I love free speech. That is why I am here today. But free speech that is actually hate speech is a comparison being made against my life. In this argument, you are saying that the right to hate-filled speech is over here, and my life is over here, and the lives of other black people and brown folks and still more marginalized people. This is a scale that cannot be balanced. The right to a neo-Nazi or a white supremacist or Joe from your work to violent hate speech is being balanced against my right to live. There is no justice there. There is no freedom there. There is only the negative piece, where civility above all else reigns and law and order is kept. We need to push the issue of hate speech as free speech, and we need to take it on as a part of the anti-racist movement, an attempt to delegitimize hate speech, to move to deplatforming white supremacists. So direct action. In the movement of anti-racism, one tool we often use is direct action, which can be marching, it can be protest, it can be interrupting city councils, it can be handing out flyers about white supremacist businesses, or some activists may choose vandalism, property destruction, or violence against those who commit violence against marginalized people as a means of direct action. This brings up a question I hear a lot in the anti-racist work that I do. The question is, do we as anti-racists, as members of Black Lives Matter, as black people, as me personally, do I want to use violence against any and all white people? Because that's the question. Do you condone violence? Those white people that are asking this question want to know if I want to use my politicized, criticized, victimized, demonized, criminalized, vilified black body against you. What you're asking me is your whiteness safe from my blackness? If the slave could, should, will, would rise up against the master and overthrow him. This question is the basis of the insistence upon civility, upon law and order, upon the need and reliance of the police, and on the need to control black bodies, be it any means, whether it be blatant white supremacist methods or the nice white liberal ones. It is the fear of a black planet. If you listen to the question I am breaking down for you, you will see your question is about your own white supremacy and not about me or black people's violence. It is a deep-seated worry that all black people want is revenge instead of justice. Somehow that if we get power, we will turn that power upon you and enslave you, murder and harm you the way we have been harmed. It also is peak white fragility, white guilt, and white supremacy. white folks assuming that we will repeat their sins and mistakes, which is a projection of y'all's history of oppression and not ours. That's not my bag. It is the thought that, one day we're all just gonna get fed up, march into our next door neighbors and kill them in their sleep, shouting, "Down with Whitey!" That is the fear that's gonna happen. So the violence question for us in the movement of anti-racism is really about the person asking the question. And I turn it back around on you and ask you, what links will you go to protect your white supremacy? Or will you choose to become an anti-racist? And you'll notice I didn't answer that question. How to be an anti-racist. We're getting down to the final bits here. I know I'm talking for way longer than I should have, but that's what happens when you give me a podium. Much of what we've talked about in this presentation has been fundamental work, or foundational work, the unlearning of white supremacist behaviors and self-examination. And I am attempting to highlight the ingrained white supremacist ideas within white liberalism specifically, and insist that if any anti-racist work is to be done, these systematic issues have to be addressed first. Waving off criticism of white liberalism as just an opinion means you never have to face your own indifference to change. Here I have outlined some steps to take to become an anti-racist and confront white supremacy. It is not an exhaustive map, but it is a start, and perhaps the work that you will be doing can continue to point you the way forward. This work is a daily practice, not a one and done. It will take your lifetime to practice correctly if you can ever get to correct it all. It is a marathon, not a race. It is akin to a devotional practice, not foxhole prayers to get you out of tight spots. It takes work and commitment. So, you see we've got the little chart right there, self-work. And you got Garnet looking beautiful. Feeling uncomfortable is a necessary part of unlearning oppressive behaviors. How many white folks have felt uncomfortable here today? Please raise your hands. My wife. I love her. Okay, good. Does it feel good? No. Is it, do you feel like you're like, sit with it. Suck it up, buttercup. The first step here is self-work. Anti-racist work demands self-reflection. It demands self-work. It demands personal growth through rigorous examination of your own actions, beliefs, and work with Black folks. Additionally, that self-work means being accountable to Black people in your life and being welcome to the uncomfortability of changing oppressive behaviors. I also ask that you don't put that work on the Black folks in your life. Believe me, they have enough work they're dealing with and that they don't get paid for every day. I was joking earlier with someone, I think my friend Gina had to go, but I was saying all of us are the diversity and inclusion experts no matter where we're at and what job we go to. We are always the go-to of, hey, is this? Do you think, how do you feel? And many of my friends who are in this room today have messaged me and been like, what do you think about this? And I do that work for them because I love and care about them and because I know they're trying. But sometimes we're asked to do that work when people aren't trying. So I ask you to do the self-work. Go read a damn book. Okay, like, Black Lives Matter has an anti-racist resource list. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. You can go through all of those books, and we keep adding new ones daily. And every day there's a new book that comes out about how to be an anti-racist, how to confront white supremacy. So you do that self-work and self-reflection. And I believe, I don't know where they're at, but I gave a little half sheets. They're at the back. So when you're leaving, I may not have enough for everybody, but there you go. But the little half sheets there is me and my white supremacy. Is that the name of it? Is that what it says? Me and white supremacy workbook. Does it say workout? Okay. Workbook. It says workbook. Workout. That would be great. The new Jane Fonda. I will not practice white fragility today. Jane Spalding was right about everything. So that is a amazing book. So what happened is that this author, and I'm spacing on her name, last name side, Layla, thank you. She wrote a workbook and was giving it away free online, and then she got a book deal, and so she put out a new book, and that new book is good. This is just the workbook part of her book. Her book contextualizes her experiences and goes into further, and so you should get her book, but this is just the workbook part, so you can literally use it at home. I created a QR code. You can go download it. You can save it. It's a free gift with purchase. Okay, so check that out. And for those of you who don't have it, I can send it to the leadership here and get it out to you. Who perhaps can't get that sheet. You can also just scan the QR code right here now. But if anybody needs help with technology, we can do that. So, activism and group work. That's the next step. So I'm at home. I did a bunch of self-work. I'm ready to go talk to some like-minded individuals. Okay, so seeking out groups and people who are attempting anti-racist work, who, like you, are also doing self-work. Groups that center Black women and Black trans women in particular. Groups that have strong working agreements, that seek out restorative justice, and when things go wrong, and they do go wrong sometimes, and within your groups, formulate your plans where your expertise aligns to take on white supremacy. So this might be policy work, it might be educational work, it might be direct street action. BLM is the organization that I know of that is doing a lot of this work, that in particular centers Black women within it. And we do have white members. We make y'all do a lot of the footwork stuff. But one of the key things is that we reevaluate what we're good at, which is most of us are educators. So we just started focusing on education. We are not necessarily good at some other things, and some of us have 10 jobs. So we have a lot on our plates. But that's key. And I also have to say that the self-work and the activism group work, those things work together. You're not going to someone who hasn't done, you're not working with people who haven't done self-work. So when you're going into a group, you question them about the self-work that they've done, about what they have done to look inside, right? And if you think that they're not really doing self-work, then maybe that's not a group you want to belong to. Then maybe that doesn't work. Also, the working agreements are key in that because interpersonal issues happen, okay? And restorative justice is a way to move through all of that, but you have to respond to the restorative justice. If someone wants to talk with you, if they want to work with you on the issues you have between you two, then it behooves you to do that work, even if you think you are fundamentally at odds. still do that work. So the next one is societal work. I do love that meme in particular. So there's a few ones where, like, it starts off, there's a few different versions of this, but I like that the equality, the equity, and the liberation, to me, the liberation would be that nobody pays a ticket to see a baseball game and we're all just chilling, watching people who like playing sports play sports, or drag shows, or, I don't know, a Prince tribute band. I don't know anybody who's in one of those. Martin's in one of those. But shameless promotion, Jada, shameless. But that we're all being able to enjoy things together, and everything doesn't have to be this incremental steps forward. Join affinity groups to form coalitions to tackle large-scale societal issues of liberation. Bring your forces together to either stop societal injustices, like those people who were in a town who wouldn't let ICE deport their neighbor. Did you hear about that? Or to call out injustices that have been happening, that happen to attempt to make things right, try to make those things right. Your affinity groups do not need to be exactly like your group, nor do they have to believe as you believe or seek liberation in the way that you seek liberation. Just set working agreements together, and you could easily find common ground for working. If they approach something different from the way that you approach things, then what you do is when you're joining together, you create an agreement that says, look, we're not comfortable with this. Could you compromise? They can say yes, they can say no. They can say maybe. They can say, let's figure out a different way. But when you work that together, first and foremost, then you can do the other work. So that may look like you are working with a group that is completely opposite to your foundational principles. But that's okay, because the main goal is to get rid of white supremacy. Right? So we approach it at all sides. All tactics are valid. The next step here is helping others. Sometimes the work of anti-racism means that we need to confront those in our lives about their thoughts and actions and words. We must do all of the other work so that we can help others to anti-racism. Now, I'm not talking about loving Nazis until they aren't Nazis anymore. There are some people who are really into that work, and they believe that that is the way forward. I, as a black woman, cannot waste my time on that. They have chosen a path, and they are sticking to that path. And there are some who might step away from that path. There are more that are committed to it until death. And you would be wasting your time, and you would be better served to help black and brown people and other marginalized people. We need your efforts for us. And if your efforts help us, we will get rid of them. The tide will turn, and either those who are on the fence will be like, well, I'm out of here, or those that are committed till death will continue to be committed till death. And that's what's up with that. So when I say you need to go and do the anti-racist work on yourself, in your groups, in your coalitions, it's like the safety demonstration that they do with you on an airplane. When the cabin pressure drops, you put the mask on yourself, and then you can reach over and put the mask on somebody else. Why? Because if you don't put the mask on yourself, you can't breathe and you're gonna pass out. So you've gotta do the work of helping yourself so that you can help other people. Also, I believe, and I'm not great on parables, so y'all gonna help me on this, but there's that story about how do you take a splinter out of your neighbor's eye when you've got a plank in your own. Well, don't be a hypocrite, take the plank out of your own eye, and then help your neighbors. And I only really know that because of Jesus Christ Superstar. No, it's gospel. It's Godspell. It's from Godspell. It's from Godspell. There's a whole song about it. I love a good musical. What can I say? So this is the helping others. This is a personal, rather than mass organizing that you're doing with a group. This is the person. This is Uncle Joe at Thanksgiving. This is when he's talking his nonsense, being like, "Look, Uncle Joe, no." It's what you're doing is you're helping to support what is and is not anti-racist. And that means calling out Uncle Joe and saying, hey, suggesting to him possibly that his racist beliefs are limiting him from truly knowing you and knowing the rest of his family and other people in the world. That he is limiting himself. He's choosing to limit himself. Uncle Joe might be perfectly fine with that, though. But maybe Uncle Joe stops getting invited to things. Helping others to good resources and good definitions and language of how to talk about white supremacy and its intersection within white liberalism and how to become an anti-racist. So you're doing that work of being like, if Uncle Joe is like, man, I would really like to know more about why I should care about the detention centers at our southern border when these people are doing something illegal by, seeking asylum. Then you can help lead him to that resource list. And you can help him to understanding because you've done the work first, right? In conclusion, I took a lot away from you today. I took white liberalism away from you. I took white fragility away from you. Uncle Bob, Uncle Joe, whatever. I took all of that away from you. But what I'm giving you is a daily practice that that can not only benefit you, but it could change the world if we're all doing it. Confronting white supremacy starts with oneself and it works its way outward. Again, the problems I outlined with white liberalism can be just as much of a roadblock to confronting white supremacy as the obvious cases of the Klan or white nationalists. It is still a form of white supremacy, and we have to face it. We have to deal with it when we see it. To become an anti-racist, the work isn't about the books you've read or the time you spent admiring MLK, but rather the time put into eliminating those traits in one's own actions and self, while also working with others to change our society too. We truly don't know what a world without white supremacy would look like. Most of our science fiction fails us when we talk about the future free from white supremacy. Even Star Trek, I love you, but even Star Trek has race problems. That one kiss between Kirk and Uhura did not solve everything. Or Spock and Uhura did not solve everything. Considering that this is a sidetrack, but the new Star Trek centers a black woman and all the Trek fans are freaking out about it. This is not how we do things. She's not a captain. Yes, she is. Yes, she is. So we need to see an Afrofuture where anti-blackness is a thing of the past. And if you don't know what Afrofuturism is, well, let's talk. Let's talk afterwards. Thank you all so much for having me here. Thank you so much. Thank you. I believe we're doing Q&A for those who want to stick around. I know the talk went long. We started late. Everything was crazy, but we're doing some difficult stuff. So if you want to leave, we'll do a transition period for those who need to leave. and then we'll do some Q&A. And I will say right now, you can ask me any question. And I can either refuse to answer it or throw shade. Those are the options. Turn on.
Ned, you got me? Okay.
Either.
Also, some of our members of our Dismantling White Supremacy group are in the back and out in the commons. If you want to take the opportunity to sign up for a group or get more information at some point, we are going to try to cultivate some opportunities, everything from TED Talks to book groups, etc. So if you're interested in something like that and want to be informed, fill that out. And I will run mics around in just a moment. Let the kind of noise die. Let me see if I get one more. Yep.
So you're waiting for Q&A, but people are still congregating and saying thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Lily, you made it. Nice to see you. I think we're just about ready for our questions, so if we can just bring voices down a little bit so that everybody will be able to hear the questions. I have 2 mics floating around. Please make sure you have a mic when you ask your questions so people who are live streaming and other people who may not be able to hear as well can hear.
And if you're here and you're staying for the questions, come forward, please, so that we're not
Shouting to the back of the room.
Let's be in conversation together, as opposed to like the distance between us.
Yes.
There's enough distance between us, right?
We won't bite, we promise.
I might bite. I'm not saying that I'm not promising.
I have one question
But I will
here.
do it consensually.
And if there's someone else who wants to raise their hand, I'll come to you next. Okay, go ahead.
Well, thank you for giving this presentation.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to ask, you mentioned a distinction between calling in versus calling out.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that, please?
Well, there's kind of this debate about the phrasing, really, of calling in versus calling out. And because calling out seems harsh, or that we're like it's aggressive, right? There's this connotation that we're like, you over there, you're doing this. We see this backlash happening with the Me Too movement, right? Of like we're calling out rapists and being like, well, like, hey, they're not just rapists. They're also abusers, So like we're like, so there's this like, it's a sense of coddling in one shape or form. It's like a linguistic, like, semantic argument that we're saying. We're trying to say the same thing, but it's just tone policing in another form. I'm saying calling out with a solution, right? Here's what we would like to see. Harvey Weinstein is a crazy abusive person. Calling him out, a solution would be for him to make restitution to those he has harmed and admit to what he's done in open public and do whatever his victims are asking him to do to make restitution. Instead of going through this whole process of, is he guilty, is he not guilty? He knows he's guilty. So it's that like, you've harmed someone. Can you please admit?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Jada, can I say, I think a lot of times it's both. It's you call out the behavior and you call the person in sometimes to the agreements.
Sure. It's for me, it's just really just that sometimes that call in, call out gets to be this like a form of white fragility.
Well, and it's really important that white people are the ones also calling out and calling in too.
Oh yeah, I don't
Like
want to have to do all this work all the time. Like I said, I did a lot of emotional prep work to be here today. How much emotional prep work did y'all do to be here today?
Over there, gentlemen.
Hi, my name's Zach Muller. I do know Jada. Thank you for the work that you've done today and
Thank you, buddy.
Emotionally preparing for this. You're right. You have done much more emotional prep work than I think the vast majority of the people here have done. So I want to acknowledge that first. One way that I know that as an ally, you have very much helped me in realizing gaps within my own white fragility, specifically is in the context of my online presence.
We talked about
I
this,
wonder, I wonder if you might speak to specifically, as I think that this will help many of the folks here in the room, the context of what you have taught me is the concept of digital blackface. If you might just kind of, speak to that a little bit, that'd be helpful, I think.
So what he's talking about is digital blackface. There was an article by Teen Vogue that was put out that is about digital blackface. And for those of you who are not on social media or don't engage in social media, this may not have any context, but I'm going to try to context it in some other ways that may make sense. But it's the act of sharing memes or black reactions that depict black people making what I would call buffoonery faces. So it is the equivalent of like the black mammy or the, smiling, grinning black child over a watermelon. It has roots and ties to black ad propagandas again, for products that invoke, menstrual imagery. And it happens so frequently that like you want to show your approval of something, you post Drake going, and like but so often that happens for black, what's happening, honey? It's okay. Oh, yeah. Oh no. So often that happens where I see this on my social media feeds, where my white friends are just posting these images and they're disconnected and they have no contextualization. They're just reactions. They're GIFs. They're just like, pictures. But a lot of times it just it feels uncomfortable. It feels in the same way of when a white person walks up to me and says, "Hey, girl." Or they use slang and appropriative behaviors that do not belong to them. And so here's how, for those who are not on social media, how that's contextualized. It does have to do with Black mannerisms, Black styles of dress even. And unfortunately, there's this weird, or fortunately, I don't know. There's a weird blurry line, which is that Black culture has become mainstream culture. Right, so the slang that we use is Black slang, and is very often Black female slang, translated through Black gay culture. And so it gets really difficult to be like, is that appropriative or is that just now common culture? But I think when your personal Black friends are like, not okay with that, that's maybe where that line is. But then we can also police our own selves online. And, do you need to share that Nene Leakes react of her looking like a very stereotypical Black mammy kind of, reaction? Is that necessary? Could you not just say thumbs up or put a heart react? Or find some other GIF to put in place. And so often I find it happens to people who are, they're just not thinking about it. And so all I've been saying is, let's think about it. Let's just think about it. If racism permeates every aspect of our culture, then it definitely permeates our online culture. And so we should be thinking about it. We should be thinking about it in everything we do. So, yeah.
Jada, thank you very much for what
David.
you've said. You've succeeded in leaving me uncertain, which is step one. And I'd like to preface this question by saying I'm asking for your advice to those of us who are white allies. I'm not offering you advice, so don't take it that way.
Okay.
I'm trying to think about the relationship between white supremacy and fragility. And my reflection is that sometimes those of us who are white, liberal, sort of semi-professorial background can feel superior to the people who are expressing fragility in a more acute fashion. So what people who have suffered other forms of class oppression, economic oppression within our society, who sometimes are way further to the right than we are. So how do we help the community as a whole to overcome the supremacy and perhaps to ease the fragility as a way of perhaps people act it's my incurably optimistic view of human nature, that people sometimes act very badly because they feel inadequate.
I agree that is 100% what white fragility is about. It's a feeling of inadequacy. It's maybe even acknowledgement of inadequacy. But again, my gut feeling is suck it up. I understand that you're reacting this way. Can you, for me, put it on the shelf and have your reaction at home? And while we're together and we're doing the work, shut up and do the work. Show up and do the work.
Absolutely, but what I was getting at is my sense that, okay, I'm a virtue, I'm trying to do it right, but here's this white person who's far to my right, who may, and so I have to avoid a feeling of superiority to that person. That's the dynamic I'm getting at.
Yes, there is that sense of, well, I'm woke and they ain't woke. I understand and they don't understand. You don't understand, is what I'm saying to you.
Well,
what I'm saying is that start from the place and practice the place every day of, I don't know shit, I'm trying to learn.
Right.
Okay, so when the Ku Klux Klaner walks in, they are definitely someone who knows, who is far right to you and may never get to a place where even you are at. But we are not at perfection, so then it doesn't matter. That quantification of, well, I've done this, I'm doing better than those people, is a false, that's a false god right there. Don't mind that. There is no measurable amount of success until you die. Martin was telling me, he was like, well, if you just want to bum everybody out, you can bum everybody out. And I was like, great, that is what I'm good at, bumming folks out. Ready? Next question, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I learned a lot. But I do have a question. You've said a couple of times, going after one Nazi at a time won't change anything. And I wonder if you could reflect on that with the hyper-focus on the Nazis at the farmers market, when there are so many other ingrained, systemic, institutionalized forms of racism in our society and in our city, I mean to say. And when I see the hyper-focus on Schooner Creek, giving them more fuel and more success. They have been making lots of money online by posting images of the protests. So again, I'd like to ask you about that.
Yeah. Well, so to be clear, myself and organizations that I have, am affiliated with, we purposefully stayed out of the farmers market situation, except to say, give it to the farmers, help them structure a new market, provide help for them. This is where the city fails, okay, is that they're like, well, either they can have it or we run it. Like, those are the options. And instead, and they're left off and they're cut off without any resource. Like, it's that. We were saying, why don't you shepherd them, and guide them and help the farmers to create the infrastructure that they need to be self-sustaining so that they can write into their own bylaws that no Nazis are allowed. So we said those things. I personally have said those things. I've said those things in meetings with the mayor. It went like this. Let me get back around to what you were saying. So we've been staying out of that fight. Those that have been leading on this issue, I personally am I disagree with how some things have gone. I respect the fact that they have been fighting, and I respect the hours and the time and the effort that has been put into it, and I support them on all levels when it comes to that. When you're saying that there's been this hyper-focus on Schooner Creek Farms, I think that that's a little bit wrong, only because they are avowed out and, so-called proud white nationalists. They are identitarians, or whatever she wants to call herself. Nazis. But she, right, yeah, she can call herself whatever she wants. At the end of the day, she's a Nazi. And so there has been a focus on them only because they're this, thorn in the side. There are more white supremacists in the farmers market. There are more vendors who are white supremacists in the farmers market. And so my focus has been about talking about this concept of that, hate speech shouldn't be free speech, and that the city can take a stand on that, and they can do it in various different ways. And so when I'm talking about fighting white supremacy and her Nazism, like, we could have had this whole discussion and decision without even bothering dealing with her, you know? Because really, it's a policy situation. We're looking at policies and ownership of the market situation. That's a governmental community discussion. It doesn't include her. It doesn't have to include her at all. And so I myself and Black Lives Matter, we're trying to get people to focus on that. It has become about her because that's what they do. They grab attention, they grab headlines, they pull focus. That's what they do. And so when you're dealing with them, it's kind of hard not to have that as a consequence. And there's no fault there to be placed on anybody other than with the city, in my opinion. The city, and then I meant the focus on the Nazis. Shut up, Josh. Yes, the Nazis are at fault. They are the problem, but also the city's handling of it is the fault and the problem. The protesters have done everything in their power, including compromise after compromise, including hours and hours of labor, including everything that they could think of to do to oppose these people. And they need to be opposed. They have to be opposed because, like I said earlier, if we don't oppose them, they think that this is a place that they can just walk in and have free reign. So we do have to oppose them. We do have to take care of them. But the administrative white liberalism, white supremacy allows them to walk in. So if we attack this, then where do they get to go? Nowhere. What up, girl?
Hey. So again, thank you.
Pause for a second. What? In every room that I am in with this woman, I want to acknowledge that she is the Democratic Party chair. And this is Jennifer Crossley. And the work that she has done in the year that she has been the Democratic Party, or year plus, that she's been the Democratic Party chair has been amazing and outstanding. She has been a leader in this community, and she has received nothing but hell for it. That white liberals in Bloomington have attacked her daily. They have disrespected her daily. They have said things to her that they would never dare to say to a white man in her position. She is a beautiful, strong Black woman, and she deserves all of our respect.
Love you.
Okay, what you gonna ask me? Not make you cry.
So,
it's all right, we'll cry later.
Speaking of Black women.
Yes.
You know, Malcolm X said this quote, "The most disrespected woman on earth is the Black woman. The most disrespected woman is the Black woman." Sometimes, as you know, and I know, and some of us here know, that sometimes our passion has been taken as the angry Black woman. Why you so mad all the time? Why you got an attitude? What's your problem?
I know.
And I get that sometimes at work. I get that in the work that I do. But then I've also changed that mindset as, heck yeah, I'm an angry Black woman. Can you talk a little bit about why it is okay sometimes to be, sometimes. It is okay to embrace the angry Black woman, and how we can do that in Bloomington for our allies, and I say that with an air quote, in this progressive community, because oftentimes we do think that we are, but obviously some of y'all sat in y'all uncomfortableness, and you understand the things that people have been trying to say for a very long time, and now that you hear it, let's go, let's get to work.
Yeah.
But let's just talk about a little bit about just embracing it.
So, yes, girl, yes. I have been referred to many times as angry. Why is Jada so angry? She's always so angry. was a city administrator for the mayor's office here today. She has definitely referred to me as angry many times before. And you know, now I'm gonna bastardize that quote from James Baldwin, that like, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. There's a lot of bad rap, and I have to say this, especially in communities of faith, about anger. And we need to know that you can use anger a few ways. You can use anger to hurt people, or you can use anger to fuel you. Earlier, I was a little bit nervous, and my friend was like, do you want a distraction? And I was like, okay. And he was telling me about something, and it made me angry, and I was like, great, I'm ready to go. And it's because it reminded me of the urgency of the moment. And so yes, Black women are disrespected by everybody within our own Black community. From without our Black community, we are used and abused. Like I said earlier, Black culture that has become the dominant culture is really just Black women culture being regurgitated through Black male culture, Black queer male culture. And we're never given the full credit of the efforts of the fruits of our labors. We are often marginalized to the extreme. Rock the mic like a vandal. And we are often, demonized when we display anger. Like I said, in the shooting video of Philando Castile, his partner is the epitome of calm. A cop, for no reason, has just shot several times into her partner. He is bleeding to death in front of her, and yet she is saying, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir, please, sir, you've killed him, sir. We take all of that on. We take all of the stress of our communities on all the time. So when I get up in front of people and I say, how dare you? And I'm pointing that finger and I am aggressive in my tone. I do that with all of my female Black ancestors standing behind me, shaking their fingers and fists too, because they weren't allowed to. And to give full acknowledgement, I am a very light-skinned Black person. I am a lot more palatable to you, white folks, than my darker-skinned sisters. My darker-skinned sisters are marginalized and disrespected. Michelle Obama, perfect example. No first lady in the histories of first ladies have ever been treated like her. And if people would have thought to treat Nancy Reagan like that, there'd be a white riot in the streets from liberals and conservatives. And yet the outrage about her being called an ape barely made ripples, barely made news cycles. When she wears her natural hair, people criticize her extremely. They say that she doesn't look professional. So, yes, I'm angry, but it's an eloquent rage, like Brittany Cooper talks about. I am using and fueling that fire within me to create change because I am so fucking angry all the time. I am so burnt out. And as my friend Gina posts online all the time, #exhausted. Because exhausted. One more news article about how a police department has been targeting the Black men in their community for 20 plus years on purpose. They have documents about it. Exhausted. That is so much to take on that at some point in time it's going to come out. And it has, there are some people that choose for it to come out and choose to do it in negative ways. I'm choosing a different way. Sorry, that was long, I know. This is what happens when you give me a mic.
Hi, Jada.
Hi, Roxanne.
I was going to do this before the question, but so thank you for coming here with your rage and love and hope and generosity. And I just wanted to follow up on white liberalism. So I don't think white liberalism is just also part of white supremacy like the Klan. In fact, it's a necessary part. It's the main part. Without white liberalism, there is no white supremacy. White liberalism creates and sustains white supremacy throughout all our society, religious, social, political organizations, including this one. And white fragility is a trigger when that status quo gets upset to put things back in order. White liberalism keeps white supremacy going. Yet, and that's why it's the biggest stumbling block. But MLK showed up to talk to the white moderates. You're here to talk to us, and not the Nazis. There's also, so there's this heartbreak of white liberalism, but there's also this hope here, right?
Yeah.
It's white liberalism right now is sufficient to sustaining white supremacy, and how do we convert it? Because it also seems to be such a target of hope in overcoming it. And I was just wondering if you could.
Well, I had an ex once say to me, you cannot be in love with someone's potential. And I guess it was aimed at me, I don't know. But, no. Actually, it wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at a former partner of hers. And when I put that in context of white liberalism is that white liberalism, what it could be, what it should be. I think I said this on Amy McCase's podcast, that like, I'm not in love with Bloomington for what it could be. I'm obsessed with the reality of changing it today for what it is. And so to believe in Afrofuturism means to like pick a destiny where we have eliminated white supremacy, where we have centered Black people, and that the beautiful aspects of Black culture help lead us into a new future. So I believe in making plans and thinking about the future. But what I don't believe in is doing that with the blinders on to what is happening to today. And I feel like white liberalism is all about like where we're going and never talks about where we're at. And so we have to talk about where we're at. We have to be honest with ourselves. We have to do the self-work. We have to do the group work. We have to see things for the way they are. We have to take the blinders off, which means getting outside of our own communities. And I should have done this when the full congregation was here, but or the full group of everybody was here. But I'm wondering how many white people have more than two Black friends, and I mean people that you go to their birthday parties, were there for the birth of their children, or are there at times of need. They know that you can rely on them and they can rely on you. How many of you white folks in this room have more than? Now, some of you that raised your hand are married to Black people, right? So, you got the cheat code. It counts. It counts. Because y'all are Black by association. You know what I mean? Well, you know what I'm saying. But like, that's the cheat code, right? So those of you who didn't answer yes, why? I have tons of beautiful, close white friends. I'm gonna point you all out for a minute. Hey, y'all. I love you. Good looking out. Some of y'all over here, good to see you. I have 1 million close white friends that they know at any point in time they need help. They can call me. or I can call them. And in fact, to these two in particular right over here, besides my wife is over there, my wife helped me propose, or my friend Devin helped me propose to my wife. My friend Zach here has helped us through some difficult times and has been a close friend. Why don't you have close black friends? It's not because black people don't want to talk to you. It may be because there's only... It isn't. Look, y'all would talk to anybody, whatever. That is not the case. It's because you are so segregated in your lives. So intensely segregated in your lives.
Hi, Jada. Excellent to see you today.
Hello, hello.
And then I have a question about the farmers market. I was wondering if Black Lives Matter has a specific platform for, like, are you endorsing the East Side market or another strategy like your year-round winter market, or you just haven't decided yet? And then as well, what do you expect out of the rest of the community to stay in solidarity?
Sorry, what was the last part of that?
What you expect out of the rest of the community to stay in solidarity with Black Lives Matter.
Cool, thank you. There are two other core council members here. We have not made a public endorsement of any farmers market. I doubt we will, not because we don't care, but because we made our statement about what's happening with the farmers market, and that's what we're doing. If at any point in time in the future we feel a need to do that, I'm sure you'll hear about it if you follow Black Lives Matter online. But I personally, because I care deeply about the individuals who are organizing the East Side Farmers Market, I 100% am behind them in everything that they do. They have been putting themselves out there in a way that has meant that they are struggling financially. And it's not like farmers make millions of dollars, but they have put themselves out there in a way that is amazing and brilliant, and they're doing that work of, instead of here are two bad choices, they're like, there are infinite choices. Let's come up with infinite solutions, and that's what they're doing, and I think that's brilliant. And so I personally have voiced a boycott for the city market. Again, this is not Black Lives Matter, this is me. I'm boycotting any market that increases police presence, increases surveillance culture, continues to allow a white supremacist to have space and room and a platform. That is not only dangerous for our community as a whole, but it literally is a threat to my life and existence. And I am advocating that all black people boycott the city market, that all people of color boycott the city market, all marginalized people, queer, trans, Jewish, non-Christian folk, boycott the city market and focus their attempts to care for the farmers by going direct to them and or supporting the East Side market. And encouraging those farmers who want to act with their conscience but are afraid of their pocketbook to move to the East Side market and pledge your support to them there.
I think we have a question there. Jada, where are you at? How many more questions would you like to take?
Look,
okay.
I just need to eat at some point.
Okay.
Bye, William. Thank you. I'll talk to you later. I did not address what people can do to support Black Lives Matter. We have fundraisers often. We're going to be doing some more events in the coming year. We haven't announced those yet because we're doing our own little gathering before we announce the next stages for this next year. Oftentimes, finance is always the best way. Money is always the best way to help support causes. But also, what happens is that people talk crap about us a lot. Shut them down. Shut them down and tell them why. When they start saying, all lives matter, look them in the face and say, all lives do not matter until Black lives matter. So there are other ways. So if you just follow us online, you can kind of see what we're going to be doing this next year. And so there will be opportunities to either give directly or attend things or be a part of things. But the best thing you can do is to continue to do this anti-racist work and tell people they need to quiet their mouths when they got our names in their mouths. So, yeah, sorry, next question.
Hi, right here.
Oh, sorry, hey.
So the idea of political, that this in the farmers market and specific to Schooner Creek is...
One quick second. Bye, loves. I love you. Take care of yourselves. Sorry.
We've heard something really latch on, among other things, but it's a political ideology. We've heard the mayor himself use that term quite a bit, and I was hoping that you could speak more to the absurdity of political ideology and hate speech.
Mm-hmm. This is a trick. This is the magic trick that white supremacists pull. They want to legitimize their shitty belief systems and their violent rhetoric. They want to legitimize it at all costs. And so, yeah, they do. I mean, their ultimate goal is to have a Nazi Party of America run for a political office. This happens in other countries. I don't know why Americans have such short memories, but we do. I don't know if it's just ingrained in our culture, but other countries remember these things. Now they struggle with them, but they remember these things. And for some reason, we just don't. It is a tactic, and the mayor falls for it every time. And again, it's not about John Hamilton as a private individual, a private citizen, the friend that you know. It is about the office that he holds and his inability to do anti-racism work the right way. And yes, it is an attempt to legitimize their hate speech. I don't know what else to say about that. It's as a political group, sure, that's a goal of theirs. Okay, fine. But it is not valid free speech. It is hate speech. It is violent rhetoric. It is incitement to violence. And that's what you will get if we have an organized white supremacist party in this country. That's what you will get. You will have marches through the streets where they, much like Charlottesville, much like the one that's going to happen in Virginia, that's what they're doing. It is a goal, and it's a long-term plan that they have been working on. And I'm not saying this as a conspiracy theorist. I'm saying that there are researchers who do the work to track this stuff from 20, 30, 40 years ago to today. They have been working towards this goal in this way. They have think tanks on how to put their ideas into mainstream society. And they have achieved it because we've been sleeping and we haven't been listening to black people. Unless it's on the radio.
Do we have another question?
Hey, Jada.
What's up?
Thank you for that talk. That was really helpful. I wanted to ask you about an aspect of it touching on the call-in, call-out thing and the civility thing that I've been chewing on for a good chunk of it. I've got one foot in the sort of mediation, conflict resolution, dialogue, deliberation world. And the thing that I've been chewing on throughout the talk, particularly related to those sections, is that though that world, the argument that would be made coming out of it is that the call-in approach of coming at somebody more gently is geared towards being more likely to be heard and actually make change, as opposed to the call-out approach, putting them on the defensive and like causing them to go shields up. And their argument would be that it's more about effectiveness than coddling. And just, could you speak to that
and that I understand, like that intellectually makes sense. Of course it does. it still is centering white voices in the conversation. And I violently reject that. I have no interest in centering white voices in the struggle for my own liberation. And so it may be more effective, but is it more effective because white folks refuse to acknowledge their own fragility and their own white supremacy? And so therefore, so I would rather go about it this way. I would rather we talk about how to become how to reject these ideals and how to become an anti-racist. And I am sure that there are people who came to this talk and they but that they didn't hear me today, and they left. There are some people who did, and it is again it's a marathon, not a sprint. And if you personally want to do, you as a white person, I mean, personally want to do the hand-holding of other white people, you go ahead and do it. But I am not doing it. I am not doing it no more. And in fact, one could say that me being here giving this talk is hand-holding. So this is about as deferential to that as I can possibly be without bending myself into pieces. And my wife can tell you I already bent myself into pieces just to be here. So if that's the work that white people want to take on with other white people, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I didn't mean that in the context specifically of this talk.
No, yeah,
I was
yeah.
thinking in the broader.
In the broader context, yeah, it's the same thing. Suck it up, Buttercup. Much like there comes a time when your kid is not being potty trained that you have to be like, you're gonna pee in that potty. and maybe this is the difference between white parenting and black parenting. But no, you ain't getting that candy in the candy store. No, Versus, well, let's talk about it for 25 minutes. I said what I said. Don't touch nothing. Don't look at nothing. You ain't getting nothing. You know what you got? You got your bed at home. You got them books. I got you at home. You got that video game. I got you at home. There, you got something. And like maybe that's the difference. Maybe I'm not sure, but maybe it is. But maybe that's why some of y'all kids be acting crazy.
Before I hand this over, I want to add to, and this is me, sorry, on my tiny soapbox as an educator. In case Jada didn't say this enough times, in case it wasn't heard loudly enough, this work is demanding us all to get out of our own ways because this is life-saving work. This is critical work for our children, for our neighbors, to be able to survive. And it is our work to do. And part of what she alluded to earlier, the group that you are most frustrated with is the stage of anti-racism work you just left. Because you want so desperately for that person to be over here. But you know what? Our job is to go, here, I'm gonna give you the life raft and I'm gonna show you that stroke and come along, come with us, okay? That's where you sometimes are most effective rather than, the Nazi over here, okay? That person who's so close, they can come alongside you. That's where to spend your energy sometimes as white folks.
But and that's as white folks, but you gotta realize that black folks, we're drowning.
Yes.
So we don't care whether or not you are 2 steps away from the shore or not. We're out in the middle of the ocean drowning, and we walked there because we would prefer drowning than the negative peace that you were offering on the shore. Much like our ancestors who refused slavery by walking into the ocean.
Amen.
So first and foremost, I want to acknowledge your presence and the work that you did today.
Thank you.
and when I mean the work, I think very few people can understand what is meant by that word work. When I leave here today, I'm going to probably go get drunk. Because
do that.
All wounds are open. I'm emotional, and and again, I think very few people understand the daily #exhausted. So that's a different thing. So all honor and grace and praise to you.
Thank you
for doing that.
Thank you, sister.
I would like to add one more thing to this concept of white fragility, not just being hurt, but asking Black folks, I don't know how to do this. That's also part. I'm too fragile. I don't know where to begin. What do I do? How to help me? And I really appreciate you as the work goes, that you center Black women, right? Because no one asked Black women. We have to figure it out. And sometimes that's my response. I have to figure it out.
So you do too.
You do too.
Suck it up.
But I just briefly wanted to, and there's so much to go with that, but that call in, call out, I'm a historian. And historically, call in, call out, no matter, it could be called moral suasion, has never worked. It's never worked.
Yeah.
Right? When we think about slavery, it never worked to appease to the morals
of
white folks, right? It never, like, come here, let you read Uncle Tom's Cabin. Right? That has never worked. What worked was white people had to see how their white lives were at risk. One of the issues I have with MLK Day, and I love MLK Day, is people want to frame it as a Black holiday, as if for some reason you did Black folks a favor.
Oh, yeah,
by killing MLK, without recognizing how the work of MLK, how the work of the civil rights movement actually benefited everyone.
Yeah, and white people in particular.
So when white people start to see their survival, like in a real way, not just the building of this country, attached to Black lives, when you start to actually center, like, and if I hear another question about that farmer's market, right? If you have a question about the farmer's market, center a Black woman.
Yeah.
Would a Black woman feel comfortable going to that farmer's market, taking her Black children to that farmer's market? And if that will answer your question if you should go
or not
to the farmer's market.
And I mean, and it should be said that the farmers market, the city's farmers market, is in full view of two of the Black churches in our community. And do any of those congregates show up on Saturday? Not many. And that is insane, because there are people at those churches all weekend long doing all sorts of things. And the fact that they don't want to walk 2 feet to get some tomatoes for whatever they're doing later says a lot about that market. And I will state very clearly, the city of Bloomington brought an outside Black person in to do an exhaustive review of the farmers market, and they found, miraculously under a rock somewhere, that Black people didn't want to go to the market. And that we have a race problem in Bloomington. But they didn't localize what the problem was. Why? Because if you are hired by the city to find out if the city has a racism problem, you are not going to tell them that they have a racism problem. You are going to generalize it, and you're going to obfuscate the facts. And part of that obfuscation was that Black people were saying that it was too expensive. Well, yes, it's too expensive, but there's also a toll you have to pay to go there, which is that you are exposed to macro and microaggressions from the moment you leave your front door to the moment you get back to your house. And we do that every day, and to do that for some overpriced tomatoes where Nazis are at seems like something I don't want to do. And so It's not just that we are concerned about the overpriced tomatoes. It's that in order to get the overpriced tomatoes, my safety, emotional well-being, and humanity has to be called into question before I get the overpriced tomatoes, which are lovely. I've had those heirloom tomatoes. They are delicious. And they do taste better, I'm not gonna lie. However, that's it. The cost is too high. The rent is too damn high, and so is the cost. But to speak, you said something else that I was like, I don't remember. Girl, MLK Day, yes. I too love Martin Luther King. What's not to love? What I hate is the watering down of a black radical. I hate it. And it's because oftentimes people pit MLK against Martin Luther, sorry, yeah, my brain just stopped working in the middle of that sentence. MLK, Martin Luther King against Malcolm X. And you know, they are two sides of the same coin. They're saying the same thing. They just have different approaches. You know, in Black Lives Matter, we have other black counterparts. They're saying the same things. They just have different approaches than we do. We think our approach is the better approach. They think their approach is the better approach. If we throw all of it at the wall, maybe something will stick. You know, so I don't hate people for their tactics. What I dislike is their disrespect of other people's tactics. And I kind of love the idea of us getting a Black Day, but I want it to be like, and this is going to be controversial, I want it to be like The Purge, where we get everything we want for just one day. Just one day. But not, I mean, it doesn't have to involve like the killing and stuff, but like, I just mean like, you know, girl, you want a house? You got a house. Huh? A Black Day too, and we could call it Reparations Day. And yep, a day without. What for one day a black person does not get murdered in their own home or on their way to buy groceries. For one day, I don't have someone look me up and down and ask me what am I. You know, just one day. They don't touch my damn hair, and they don't, and I don't get called an angry black woman. Just one day, I would take that day, and I would love that day. But yeah, Martin Luther King Day is a day of service. It should be a day of service for us all. And I jokingly say that I call it Black People Day, and where if I don't want to do anything, I don't have to do anything because I didn't do the work all year long. But white people should be of service that day. White people should be of service that day. White people should be of service that day. Say it with me. White people should be of service that day. Thank you.
Jada, I do just want to acknowledge time because we are taking advantage, and I want to make sure.
I get to go have Culver's after this?
Okay. So, is there any last question? I'm going to say this is our last one or two questions because I do want this woman who has been so incredibly generous with her time to go to Culver's. She has earned it. Oh. A comment, okay.
I'll take comments.
Yeah. All right. Hold on, let's give you the mic.
Yeah, I can't really, I'm deaf too.
I just want to say, like, the danger in that, the call-in versus call-out, is that I have so many people that I met on a bus to Washington to protest. I have so many friends who have read all the books that are listed on your Black Lives Matter site, and they're the ones who were not here at this meeting, and they're the ones who have been the most vocal about the farmers market, and they're the most dangerous ones. Because they're the ones who think they're the woke white people because they think they've done the work.
Yeah.
And so they just, they like close off everything. They're not here to listen to it because they think they've done it already.
Yeah.
So
well,
that's, to me, the danger.
Oh, yeah. Well, here's the joke about wokeness. You have to stay woke. Yeah, that concept is W.E.B. Du Bois coined that. It was sort of further amplified in our current media by Erykah Badu. But the conversation is about continuing to wake up. You don't wake up and you're awake for the rest of your life. You continue to wake up on a daily basis. Like I said, anti-racism work, the work that I outlined for you today, is a daily practice. It is a devotional practice. It is something that you will strive to complete at the end of your life. And you may or may not get there. And W.E.B. Du Bois says that you don't. That wokeness is not an achievable level. But it doesn't mean, much like enlightenment, right? It's not an achievable level. It is something you strive for daily. So whatever books they're reading, they must not be reading them well. And I can tell you that anybody that is reading the right books is doing it in a vacuum if they are not in connection and working with Black people in their lives. So that's what I'm talking about. This all can't just be happening in your white head and in your white space with your white friends on a Sunday, eating crumpets or whatever. I love a good crumpet. I would like some crumpets right now. Next time, can we have crumpet? Okay. But that work is it's meaningless. It's meaningless when you're doing it in a vacuum. You have to be accountable. You have to be accountable. I myself do not consider myself a trans individual. But if I do not work on trans rights with trans people, and I just go out there and I'm like, trans people's rights, I know everything there is to know, use them pronouns. I'm doing nothing for them. I am not of service. I am not of help. I am perpetuating problems. I need to help elevate their voices, and I need to say, you, cis people, just like me, shut up and listen to them. And if I can read all the books, I can go to all the marches, I can sit in at all the meetings, but if I'm not working in conjunction with my trans siblings, then I'm not doing anything for them. So, boom, goes the dynamite.
All right, if I don't cut you off, your wife's gonna come tackle me. So, no, I'm just kidding.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you all being here and staying late. Man, we blew past time. But thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Intense gratitude for you coming
Thank
here.
you.
And I will probably try to post some of this stuff in the event. So I think if you go back and look at the event, you should be able to find it.
And if any of you are members of other faith communities, think about having this talk in those faith communities. If you are members of other organizations, think about inviting me to have this talk in those groups. I'm saying this because it may be the best way to disseminate this information, and it may be the best way to get things out there. So, not just shameless self-promotion, but there are other people who are doing this as well.
Netted is, I was just going to plug that.
Sweet.
So it
I
is
didn't know
recorded, which means it'll be available for just a little bit. If you go to the Bloomington.org page, at the top there's a little tab that says live stream, and if you go there, it kind of will come up like with the first event or two, and so this one should be there.
Cool. That's awesome. That's great.
So please share that with your friends. Invite them to, hey, watch that, and let's go have coffee.
Do you mind if we grab that and put that on BLM page if the fellow BLMers agree?
Mm-hmm. We'll see how to do it. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you all.
What I'll do, because it only stays on.